What's up, Liron here. Today we're going back to basics and I'm going to show you what I believe is the 6 most important and best watercolor painting techniques. These are very common. You're going to do these a lot, so might as well go back and revisit the basics and strengthen our ability to do them properly. So let's get started. We're going to start with an even layer, and I'm just going to pick up the paint I have here on the palette. It's going to be a bit of a mix of many colors, but let's make it more blue. And I want to show you, so this is something I talked about in previous videos, but to get an even wash, all you really have to do is just make sure that you have enough paint and that you work quite fast so that the edge doesn't dry. Because what happens with watercolor, as you may know, when this edge dries, I'm going to lose it and it's not going to be even. So I have to work quite fast. Sometimes you will work at an angle. Right now I'm not working at an angle whatsoever, but sometimes you will do that, and that will cause the water to bead down, and that'll make it a little easier. But this step really is all about the speed and mixing enough paint. That's all there is to it. You want to make sure you work fast. Now, if you don't get an even layer, even when doing all of that, it may be an issue with your paper. So try perhaps upgrading it. Paper is the one thing I don't think you should skimp on. It's the one ingredient that's really important. Now I'm just gonna soak back some of this paint, because what happens is if I'm gonna have a pool here, it's gonna bleed back upwards. Okay, this can happen. Now the next technique I want to show you is a gradual layer. So we're gonna start light, and this is perfect because we have some light paint here on the palette, and it may bleed to the left. I'm gonna try to avoid that, but I'm going to start very light, and with this kind of wash, what you want to do is very gradually increase the consistency of paint. So I'm picking up more paint and adding it to the mix, like so, but not too much. And then I start to add that in. And remember here, same principle. You want to make sure you work a little faster than you may think you should, because that'll make sure that everything is turns out very smooth and even. And you see, the more I come back, the more paint I add here to the mixture on the right. I'm gonna wrap it up with just pure paint off the well and just place it here on paper. And here you can see this beautiful gradated effect from light to dark. Next technique we're gonna do, and this is really a blitz of techniques, is wet and wet. So to do wet in wet, it means that instead of painting wet with the paint on dry paper, we're painting on wet paper. So I'm going to pre-wet the surface of the paper. The water is going to be a little tinted by the blue, but that's fine. We'll still get our lovely technique here. So I pre-wet the surface, and now I'm coming back with paint, and I'm injecting it into it, like so, okay? And this is all there is to wet in wet. In terms of the basic technique. Now the key here really is the timing, because the sooner you come, the more dispersed the paint is going to be, the less it will preserve its shape. But the more we wait and let this maybe dry off for a couple of seconds, what you'll see is that the paint disperses less and less. Now, one important thing about wet and wet, when you want to achieve that effect, you have to come back with stronger consistency of paint than what's on paper. To negate the fact that the paper is super wet, you have to actually grab a lot of paint. Because if I'd come back with a very wet consistency, look what happens. I come back with a very wet brush, it actually really disperses extremely. In order for it to preserve its shape, and let's soak back some of this water here, you have to come back with a bit of a stronger consistency, okay, of paint. And that's all there is to wet and wet. You can play around with it. Different paints will disperse differently, wet and wet, so that's another important thing to have in mind. Next up we have negative painting, and for that, which I actually forgot to do, we're gonna need some shapes to paint around. So here we go, that's one. Notice how careless I am when drawing these. Now here you may want to switch to a smaller brush. I have confidence in this brush, even though it's quite large, so I'm just gonna stick to it. And I'm going to treat this in a kind of impressionistic manner, so I wouldn't worry too much about not following the shapes perfectly, but I will do my best. So here we go, cutting around the shape. That's all there is to negative painting. And this is an extremely important technique because in watercolor you constantly negative paint. And the reason for that is that you always leave the white, or you always leave the highlight. That's how watercolor works. You paint from light to dark, and you always leave behind what needs to stay light, okay? Unlike oils where you come back with an opaque white paint or you know, a mix of white and yellow and highlights, and you just put in those highlights. With watercolor, you kind of have to plan it out and draw where the highlights are gonna be. So same principles of the even wash. You wanna make sure you work relatively quickly, especially with these kinds of more complex shapes, because then you will start getting the paint to pull in different areas and the result isn't going to be as good. Next up is a technique that's quite complex. It looks deceptively easy, but it's not, and that's dry brush. What you want to do for dry brush is actually gather some dry paint. You want it to be as dry as possible. So you just grab a lot of dry paint. Now this isn't enough sometimes. Here it's enough. You see I get this broken edge, but you have to work fast, and this is a soft bristle. If this was harder, or more of a spring kind of brush, it would have been incredibly difficult to get this effect. What you sometimes can do is wipe the brush off on a towel to get rid of more moisture, and then you'll get this effect more easily, or add some more thick paint to the mix. You see here? So this is about the speed. Sometimes having the brush at an angle can help, like actually flatten it on the paper and go like this, okay? Like this. You really have to sometimes push the angle. Now here you see it backfired on me, but that's fine. So this is the way to do it. A lot of thick paint. Many beginners do the mistake of having too much water in the brush. You don't need any water. You just need paint and as dry a brush as possible. It just needs to be a little damp. Okay. Next and last, we're gonna do lifting. So in order to do lifting, I'm gonna apply some paint here, and this will depend on the type of paint you use, the brand and everything, but with lifting, what you do is you lift back the paint from the paper, like I showed you that I soaked the paint off. This is the same thing, okay? So here's my wash. Now I come back and I'm gonna do this with, it's perhaps better to do this with a bit of a more synthetic bristle because it will pick it up better, but we're gonna try and do it with a soft brush. I completely clean it from water, and then I come back and I lift. You see how this works? And this is a great way of just lifting. Let's imagine maybe these are sun rays coming through the clouds. This can be so many different things, maybe a bit at an angle, but you have to make sure to clean the brush in water and then wipe off all the excess moisture. I'm going to show it to you with a bit of a more synthetic brush with more spring, this Princeton brush. What I used so far was a Raphael brush. That's wonderful, great brush. Sometimes it's better to do this kind of a technique with a bit of a synthetic brush. Now, many times you'll see many artists actually hold the paper at all times because it's really important to lift back sometimes. You constantly add and lift. So I'm gonna lift, and then if I want to darken a spot, I'll come back with some paint and darken it, okay, like this, okay? This is what the watercolor process is all about. You always add and reduce, but technically speaking, sometimes you'll have a highlight like here, you have to paint around it, okay? So let's just do a quick recap. Even layer, sometimes you want to work at a bit of an angle, you want to work fast, you want to make sure that you have enough paint mixed. Gradual layer, or sometimes called a gradated wash or layer. You start light or dark and you constantly add or reduce the amount of paint, and you try to work again fast to have an even kind of a layer. Then we have wet and wet. This is you pre-wet the surface and come back. You have to come back with a bit of a stronger consistency of paint. Negative painting, you just paint around the shapes. Dry brush, more paint, less moisture in the brush. Really just have it a bit wet, like 1 out of 10 level. And then lifting, you come back with a dry brush and lift back the paint. You could do lifting in a bit of a weird way and come back with some water, and this will make the paint move aside and make room for the water. That's another method of doing this. So this is it. These are all the techniques. I hope you enjoyed this one, and let's wrap up this video. So this is it for this one. I decided really to take a break and go back to the basics for some of the viewers that need this. You know, I mostly post longer demonstrations and things of that nature, but this time I wanted to go back to the beginning. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have and if you found it helpful, don't forget to give it a like. And if you've been lurking or you're watching and you're not subscribed, please subscribe to receive notifications. Hit the bell button to make sure that you don't miss out on new videos. I'm posting tons of processes and series and all sorts of cool things. And I have a couple of really cool new ideas in store for you. So thank you so much, and I will see you again in another vid real soon.